She stood in the middle of the street, holding her baby, and waited for her husband to beat her. The whole town was watching. Dust devils danced around her worn-out boots. The setting sun painted the dusty road in shades of blood and fire. Her name was Eleanor Hartman, but everyone called her Ellie. She was 19 with shoulders built for work and a spirit that had learned how to bend without breaking. The baby in her arms, Micah, was a warm, sleeping weight against her chest, the only steady thing in her world. The door to the mercantile store creaked open, and a man stepped out. Caleb Hartman, her husband. He had a coil of rawhide in his hand, and he wasn't looking at her. He was looking past her, at the faces on the porches, the eyes in the windows. He was putting on a show. "You shame me," Caleb's voice cut through the silence, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Going in there, asking for credit like some beggar. You make me look like I can't provide for my own family." Ellie pulled the baby a little closer, so his tiny head was tucked right under her chin. "We're almost out of flour, Caleb. Micah will be hungry in the morning." A smile, thin and cruel as a wire, stretched across Caleb's face. "Oh, Micah will be fed," he said. "And you will remember your place." He took a step forward, the rawhide swinging loosely from his hand. Across the street, men on the porch of the saloon stopped talking. Widow Mayfield, the town's chief gossip, pinched her mouth shut, her eyes wide with hungry anticipation. Even the sheriff, Amos Klein, who was usually half asleep in his chair, shifted, pulling the brim of his hat down a little lower. He wasn't going to intervene. He never did. "Please, Caleb," Ellie whispered, her voice barely audible. "Let's just go home." She craved the shadows of their small house, any corner where eyes couldn't follow her. But Caleb wasn't interested in going home. He wanted an audience. He raised the rawhide whip. "You'll apologize right here," he commanded, "right where you forgot yourself." The leather hissed through the air. It didn't strike her skin, not yet. It snapped against the sleeve of her dress, a sound as sharp and loud as a gunshot in the quiet street. The baby, Micah, startled awake and began to cry, his little hands balling into fists. A thin line of fire bloomed on Ellie's arm, but the heat of a dozen pairs of eyes watching her burned hotter. She didn't flinch. She just rocked her baby, humming softly, a quiet tide refusing to be pulled by the moon of his rage. But Caleb wasn't done. He swung the whip again, this time catching her forearm. Micah's cries grew louder, sharper. Ellie angled her body, trying to shield the child, tasting iron in her mouth even though there was no blood. Only the bitter taste of humiliation. And that's when she saw him. At the far end of the street, a tall rider had dismounted. He moved with a strange, fluid grace, tying his horse without a wasted motion. He was an Apache, you could tell by his braided hair and the quiet confidence in his posture. He started walking toward them, his stride unhurried, his gaze as level as still water. The town noticed him the way a farmer notices a storm cloud on the horizon. First a change in the air, then a sudden, prickling silence. Caleb saw him too, and he didn't like it. He saw the stranger look at Ellie, a brief, respectful dip of the head. It was a small gesture, but in a town built on power and dominance, it was a challenge. "Mind your own path," Caleb snarled at the stranger. "This is my wife." The Apache man stopped a few paces away. His eyes, dark and unblinking, settled on Caleb. When he spoke, his voice was low, but it carried a weight that made the air feel heavy. "You teach by hurting," he said. "People forget lessons like that once the pain is gone." Caleb laughed, a short, ugly sound. "A public show makes the memory stick." He raised the rawhide a third time, ready to leave a mark that everyone would see. But this time, the whip never landed. The stranger's hand moved like a striking snake, catching the rawhide in midair. He just caught it. His fingers closed around the leather, stopping it dead. The street fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop in the dust. Even Micah's cries hitched into surprised hiccups. For a long moment, the two men stood there, connected by the limp leather of the whip. The stranger hadn't attacked Caleb. He hadn't thrown a punch. He had simply ended the sentence. And in that moment, Ellie knew her life was about to change forever, but she had no idea if it was for better or for much, much worse. Sheriff Klein finally heaved himself out of his chair. "All right, that's enough," he called out, his voice thick with a duty he clearly didn't want. But his words were empty. The real power in the street wasn't wearing a badge. Caleb, his face turning a dark, blotchy red, ripped the whip from the stranger's grasp. He was furious, embarrassed. And when a man like Caleb is embarrassed, he gets dangerous. He shoved the rawhide into his belt and lunged not for Ellie, but for the baby. "If you won't behave, I'll take him," he snarled, his fingers hooking into the edge of Micah's blanket. Ellie's arms tightened instinctively, but Caleb was stronger. The blanket started to pull away. Then, just as quickly as before, the stranger moved. He didn't push Caleb, didn't shove him. He just stepped between them, a solid, unmovable presence, a human wall. He simply stood there, and the air itself seemed to bend around him. Caleb was blocked. From a nearby porch, Widow Mayfield's voice cut through the tension, brittle and sharp. "Someone should fetch the pastor." But no one moved. Caleb looked to the sheriff for help, but Klein just looked tired, weary of the whole affair. Caleb's eyes shot back to Ellie, and in them she saw a terrifying promise. This bill would be collected later in private, where no one could see. "You make me look small," he hissed, his voice a low, venomous whisper meant only for her. And that's when something inside Ellie shifted. It wasn't a sudden fire, but a slow, hardening resolve, like iron cooling. "Let's go home, Caleb," she said, and the quiet strength in her own voice surprised her. "We'll talk there." Caleb hesitated, then tried to dart around the stranger to grab Micah from the other side. But the stranger's forearm came up, casually brushing Caleb's hand away. It wasn't a hit, just a simple, firm redirection. From the saloon porch, a few men coughed to hide their laughter. The humiliation was complete. Caleb's fist clenched, ready to swing. "Stand down, Hartman," Sheriff Klein finally barked, finding his voice. "There's a baby here. That's enough." The stranger looked at Ellie, a silent question in his eyes. She understood. "Do you want to leave?" She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He stepped aside just enough to create a narrow path, a corridor that only existed for her. She walked through it, her shoulder brushing against his sleeve for a fraction of a second. She didn't look back at her husband. She didn't look at the watching town. She just kept her eyes forward, feeling their stares like heat on her skin. Caleb didn't follow. He stood there, defeated, as the town watched him. Finally, he spat in the dust and stormed off toward the saloon, where he could drown his shame in whiskey. Ellie slipped into the shadows between two buildings, finally allowing herself to breathe. Micah's cries softened to whimpers. She rocked him gently, humming a tune from her childhood. When she looked up, the stranger was there, waiting at a respectful distance. He wasn't crowding her. He was giving her space. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady now. He lifted his eyes to meet hers. "For now," he replied, and the simple words felt like a warning. "I am Tyan." "Eleanor," she said. "Ellie Hartman." She adjusted Micah's blanket. "I don't know how I can repay you." "You do not owe me," Tyan said. He glanced toward the saloon, where the sound of forced laughter was already starting up. "That man, he bleeds from his pride. He presses on the wound to feel alive." "He can be better," Ellie said, more out of habit than belief. "He was gentler once." Tyan didn't argue. "Sometimes a river forgets its banks after heavy rain," he said, his eyes finding Micah's sleeping face. "Your son is strong." The kindness in his voice was so unexpected it almost made her knees buckle. "He is," she whispered. "Are you just passing through?" "I follow a long road," Tyan said, "but a horse rests where the shade is honest. I will be near tonight." He was offering protection, a silent promise to keep watch. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She walked the narrow lane home, feeling his presence behind her, not as a threat, but as a shield. She could hear the whispers of the townspeople fading behind her, like burrs falling from her dress. The Hartman house was small, the white paint peeling. Inside, she laid Micah in his basket and finally looked at her arm. A pale red welt was already rising where the whip had struck. She dampened a cloth and pressed it to the sting, the cool water a small mercy. The house was quiet, but it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the quiet of a held breath. She didn't have to wait long. Bootsteps on the path. Heavy. Angry. Caleb's shadow fell across the doorway before he did. The smell of cheap whiskey and rage filled the room. He saw the welt on her arm, and for a fleeting second, a flicker of something, shame maybe, crossed his face. But it vanished as quickly as it came. "You made a scene," he growled. "You made it," Ellie replied, her voice even. "Nothing is over," he snapped. "You don't get to make me look like a fool and then trade looks with some savage." Ellie stood up, positioning herself between Caleb and Micah's basket. "He stopped you from hurting me more. That is all that happened." Caleb stepped closer, his face inches from hers. "You think I won't finish what I started? Just because he was there?" His eyes darted to the basket. "You forget the order of things in this house, Ellie." "The only order right now," she said softly, setting the words down between them like a fragile fence, "is that Micah is sleeping. You can speak quietly, or you can go outside and yell at the wind." He stared at her, genuinely surprised by her defiance. For a second his expression softened, and she saw a glimpse of the man she had married. But it was just a glimpse. The coldness returned, sharp and mean. "We will talk," he said, but it was a threat, not a promise. He ate the stew she'd left for him in silence. When he was done, he pushed his chair back. "I'll sleep in the shed," he announced. It was a punishment he disguised as a choice. "You think on your place." He left, and the house was quiet again. Ellie went to the window. A sliver of moon hung in the sky. She thought of Tyan's steady eyes in the corridor he had made for her, a space where she could move forward. She didn't know what Caleb would do next. She didn't know if the tall stranger would still be in town tomorrow. All she knew was that something inside her had been unlocked. A door had opened, and she had a feeling that Caleb was going to do everything in his power to slam it shut. The next morning, Caleb was gone. He'd left before dawn, the shed empty except for the lingering smell of stale whiskey. His absence wasn't a relief, it was a pause, the quiet before the storm. Ellie moved through her morning chores with a new, deliberate calm. She fed Micah, his small hand clutching a lock of her hair. It was a simple, grounding gesture. By mid-morning, she needed to draw water from the well. The air was crisp and cold. She was winding the heavy rope, her palms stinging, when a shadow fell over her. It was Tyan. He didn't speak. He simply took the rope from her, his grip sure and strong, and drew the heavy bucket up as if it weighed nothing. He set it on the edge of the well, the water barely sloshing. "Thank you," Ellie said. "Your hands are marked from the rope," he observed, his gaze steady. "They'll fade," she replied. "Fading does not mean it is forgotten," he said, and his eyes flickered for a second to her sleeve, where the welt from the whip was hidden. Micah nestled in her arm, reached a tiny fist toward the tall, quiet man. A ghost of a smile touched Tyan's lips. "Your son is not afraid." "He doesn't know the world yet," Ellie said softly. "Dust always finds its way inside," Tyan murmured, looking toward the road. It sounded like a proverb, but it felt like another warning. Later that afternoon, she had to go into town. They were out of salt pork, and Caleb hadn't left any money. She bundled Micah against the cold and walked, dreading the whispers she knew would follow her. Sure enough, Widow Mayfield was on her porch, knitting needles clicking like insects. "Well now, Mrs. Hartman," she called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I hear you had company yesterday." Ellie stopped. "If you mean the gentleman who stopped my husband from making a scene, then yes," she said, her voice clear and even. The widow's eyebrows shot up. "An Apache gentleman," she corrected, drawing the word out. "And I hear he's been seen near your place more than once." "The well is public," Ellie said calmly. "Some people draw water without malice." "Some people draw other things," the widow muttered, turning back to her knitting. Ellie walked on, her cheeks burning. She felt every eye on her as she entered the mercantile. The store owner was polite but cool. She bought what she needed and stepped back out onto the street, and there he was again, Tyan. He was leaning against a hitching post, but he straightened when he saw her. "You walk alone," he stated. It wasn't a question. "I'm used to it." "Being used to a thing is not the same as it being safe," he said. A rider clattered past, kicking up a cloud of dust. Tyon moved without thinking, stepping slightly in front of her to shield her and Micah from the grit. It was a small, protective gesture that no one else would have noticed, but it felt like a thunderclap in Ellie's heart. He walked with her to the edge of town. They didn't speak much. At her gate, he stopped. "The wind will turn cold tonight," he said. "Keep your child near the fire." Then he hesitated. "If trouble comes," he added, his voice low, "light a lamp in your east window." It was a lifeline, a secret signal. She nodded, her throat tight. Throat. He turned and walked away, his long shadow stretching behind him. That night, Caleb came home. He reeked of whiskey, but his eyes were sharp and sober with suspicion. "I hear talk," he said, dropping his coat onto a chair. "There's always talk in this town," Ellie replied, her back to him as she tended the fire. "This talk is about you," he snapped. "You and that Apache." She turned to face him. "He drew water for me at the well." Caleb's jaw clenched. "And he was seen walking you home." "He walks where he pleases. I don't command him." "You could tell him to stay away," Caleb insisted, stepping toward her. And there it was. The corridor in her mind opened again, wide and clear. "I could," she said, meeting his furious gaze. "But I won't." His mouth twisted into a snarl. "You think he cares for you? He's a savage watching for weakness." "Then he's not the only one," she shot back, the words escaping before she could stop them. His hand twitched, and for a second she thought he would strike her. But he didn't. He just turned away, his shoulders slumped in a strange kind of defeat. But it wasn't a victory. Ellie knew it was just a temporary retreat. A few nights later, she found a small, mysterious bundle on her porch. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a tiny baby's moccasin, stitched from the softest deerskin she had ever felt. There was no note, but she knew. She knew it was from Tian. Her heart ached with a feeling she couldn't name. She quickly hid it in a drawer, beneath a sack of flour. But secrets in that house had a way of being found. 3 nights later, Caleb stormed in, his boots caked with mud. He was holding the tiny moccasin in his hand. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. "It was a gift," she said, her own voice barely a whisper. "From him," Caleb spat. "Do you take me for a fool, Ellie?" "I take you for a man who knows when he is being cruel," she replied, her voice gaining strength, "and who sees when someone else is being kind." He slammed the moccasin down on the table. "You are making me a laughingstock." "You are making yourself one," she said, and the words landed with the heavy thud of truth. He took a step toward her, his chest heaving. Then his eyes slid past her, to where Micah was watching them from his cradle, his big eyes wide and curious. A cold, calculating look came over Caleb's face. "Maybe my sister would raise him better," he said slowly, deliberately. "She's been wanting a child." The blood drained from Ellie's face. The room tilted. This was a new threat, a deeper, more terrifying one. She placed a protective hand on the edge of the cradle. "He stays with me," she said, her voice shaking but firm. Caleb leaned in, his whiskey-sour breath washing over her. "That's not your choice to make alone, Ellie," he whispered. "You remember that." That night the house felt like a cage. The wind howled outside and Ellie sat in the dark, holding her sleeping son. The threat wasn't about a whip anymore. It was about losing the only thing in the world that mattered to her. She looked toward the east window, where the night was a black, empty square. And for the first time, she seriously considered lighting the lamp. The rain started that night, a slow, miserable drizzle that turned the whole world to mud and shades of gray. For 2 days, it didn't stop. Caleb was a dark cloud inside the small house, his silence more threatening than his yelling. He hadn't mentioned his sister again, but the threat hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. On the third morning, he came in from the shed, his boots dripping mud on the floorboards. He slapped a folded piece of paper down on the table. "I've written to my sister," he announced, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "She'll be here in a week's time. She'll take the boy for a spell. Give you some time to think about what a wife's place is supposed to be." Ellie felt the floor drop out from under her. Her hand tightened on Micah's blanket so hard that the baby whimpered. "You won't," she whispered, but the words had no force. Caleb smirked. It was the ugliest expression she had ever seen. "Oh, I will," he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. And if you fight me on it, you'll wish you hadn't. This town is already whispering about you and your Apache friend. Don't give them more to talk about. You're the one giving them a reason to talk, she shot back, her voice shaking with a fury that surprised her. He took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes cold and hard over the rim of the cup. Careful, Ellie, he said. You're starting to sound like you believe you have a choice. He was right. In this town, in this time, what choice did she have? A man's word was law, especially when it came to his own family. The sheriff wouldn't help her. The town would side with Caleb. She was trapped. But then she thought of the lamp. She thought of Tyon. He had offered a bridge. Now she had to decide if she had the courage to walk across it. That afternoon, as soon as Caleb rode out of town, Ellie wrapped Micah in his warmest blanket and walked through the mud and the rain, straight to the blacksmith's forge. She knew Tyon sometimes bought supplies there. The forge was a place of fire and force, of shaping hard things into new forms. It felt right. He was there, talking quietly with the blacksmith. When he saw her approaching, his expression changed. There was no surprise in his eyes, only a quiet readiness. He had been expecting her. I need to speak with you, she said, her voice tight. He led her into the warm, dim shop, the air thick with the smell of coal and hot iron. Your husband has made his move, Tyon said. It wasn't a question. Ellie's eyes widened. How did you know? The wind in a small town carries more than dust, he said simply. He means to take your son. Tears pricked at Ellie's eyes, but she blinked them back. This was no time for tears. I won't let him. Tyon studied her face for a long moment, his gaze seeming to look right through her skin and into her soul. He was measuring her resolve. Then you will need help, he said finally. But help is a bridge. You must choose to walk it. I'm walking, she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. He nodded once, a quick, sharp gesture. Then listen carefully. Caleb is a coward. He will not try to take the boy in the open again. He will wait until you are alone, when the law cannot see him. You must be ready before that moment comes. What do I do? She asked, her heart pounding against her ribs. You keep the child with you, always. Never let him out of your sight. And when you see Caleb riding toward the house with purpose in his stride, you light the lamp in the east window. I will not be far. She wanted to ask him why. Why was he doing this? Why did he care what happened to her and her son? But the questions felt too big, too dangerous to ask. So she just said, thank you, and the words were filled with all the things she couldn't say. The next 2 days were a blur of tension and fear. Ellie felt like a cornered animal. She never let Micah out of her arms. She slept with him in the cradle beside her bed, her hand resting on his tiny chest. Every hoofbeat on the road made her jump. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Caleb was barely there, and when he was, he treated her like a piece of furniture. His silence was a weapon, designed to wear her down, to make her feel isolated and helpless. On the third evening, the storm finally broke. The sky was a dark, bruised purple. Ellie was rocking Micah by the dying fire when she heard it, the sound of a single horse coming at a steady, determined trot. Not ambling, not wandering, coming with a purpose. She scrambled to the window and peered through a crack in the curtains. It was Caleb. His shoulders were set, his jaw was tight, and his eyes were fixed on the house like a predator. Her breath caught in her throat. This was it. Her hands shaking, she turned to the small oil lamp she had placed on the shelf. She struck a match, the flare of it seeming impossibly bright in the dim room. She lit the wick. The flame sputtered, then caught, a small, steady point of golden light. She placed the lamp in the east-facing window. She had no idea if Tyon was close enough to see it. She didn't know if he would come. But lighting that lamp was an act of defiance. It was a signal that she was not going to surrender. The front door burst open. Caleb stood there, silhouetted against the dying light, water dripping from the brim of his hat. I've come for the boy, he said, his voice as cold and dead as the rain-soaked ground. Ellie stood up, placing her body squarely between Caleb and the cradle. You're not taking him. His eyes narrowed. A cruel smile touched his lips. You think you can stop me, Ellie? I know I can try, she said. He lunged. His hands shot out, reaching for Micah in the cradle. And then the doorway was filled with a shadow. Caleb froze, his hand hovering in midair. Tyan stood there, silent and imposing. He stepped into the room, his presence sucking all the air out of it. He didn't look angry. He looked inevitable, like a force of nature. "You heard the woman," Tyan said, his voice a low rumble. Caleb's face contorted with rage. "This is between me and my wife." "This is between a man and his choice," Tyan replied calmly. "You choose to take from the weak. I choose to stop you." For a heart-stopping moment, the two men faced each other. The only sounds were the wind rattling the window panes and the soft crackle of the fire. Caleb's pride was at war with his fear. Pride won. He lunged again, but he never reached the cradle. What happened next was a blur. Tyan moved with a speed that was almost inhuman. There was a scuffle, a grunt of pain from Caleb, and then a sickening thud as Caleb's head hit the wooden floor. He lay there unconscious. Ellie stared, her hand pressed to her mouth, her heart hammering against her ribs. Micah began to cry, frightened by the sudden noise. Tyan stood over Caleb's still form, his chest rising and falling. He looked at Ellie, his dark eyes filled with a grim understanding. "He will not stop," Tyan said. "When he wakes, he will be worse. You are not safe here. Not anymore." "Where can I go?" Ellie whispered, pulling a crying Micah into her arms. "My people have a camp, hidden in the foothills," Tyan said. "It is a long ride, but you would be safe there. He would never find you." Leave. Leave her home. The only life she had ever known? It was a terrifying thought. But staying was a death sentence. Maybe not a quick one, but a slow, soul-crushing one. "He will hunt me down," she said, the fear a cold knot in her stomach. "Then we must make sure he cannot," Tyan replied, and the look on his face sent a shiver down her spine. He bent down and, with surprising ease, began to tie Caleb's hands and feet with rope from a nearby hook. "I will take him to the sheriff. I will tell Klein that he attacked you and that I defended you. It will buy us time." "The sheriff won't do anything. He never does." "He will this time," Tyan said with a strange certainty, "because if he doesn't, I will tell the town what I know about him." Ellie stared at him. "What do you know?" Tyan finished tying the last knot and stood up. "I know that Sheriff Klein is not a lazy man," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "He is a paid one. Caleb's father owns the mortgage on the sheriff's land. Klein does what he is told." The revelation hit Ellie like a physical blow. The sheriff wasn't just indifferent. He was complicit. He had been bought and paid for. The whole system, the whole town, was rotten from the inside out. How do you know all this?" she stammered. Tyan's gaze softened as he looked at her, and then at the sleeping baby in her arms. "Because my fight is not with Caleb Hartman," he said, his voice filled with a sudden raw emotion. "It never was. My fight is with his father." He paused, and the words he spoke next shattered Ellie's world into a million pieces. "Your father was my friend Eleanor. He was my blood brother. And old man Hartman had him murdered, years ago, over a land dispute. I have been waiting a long time to see justice done." Ellie couldn't breathe. Her father. He had died in a riding accident when she was just a girl. They had all believed it, but it had been a lie. Her entire life, the foundation of her world, had been built on a lie. And this quiet, powerful stranger, this Apache man the town called a savage, was not just a random passerby. He was a ghost from her past, an avenger. And he had come not just to save her, but to settle a debt that had been owed for a very long time. Suddenly, the lamp in the window wasn't just a call for help. It was a beacon that had reignited a war. The silence in the small cabin was deafening. Ellie's mind reeled, trying to process the impossible truth. Her father, murdered. Caleb's father, the killer. And Tyan, this guardian angel forged from vengeance, had been watching over her all this time. My father?" she whispered, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. "His name was John," Tyan said, his voice soft with memory. "He was a good man, an honest man. That is a dangerous thing to be when men like Silas Hartman are drawing maps." Silas, Caleb's father, A man who was a pillar of the community, who everyone respected. A monster hiding in plain sight. Tyan hoisted the still unconscious Caleb over his shoulder as if he were a sack of grain. We do not have much time. Silas Hartman has ears everywhere. Widow Mayfield is one of them. She reports everything to him for a small purse of coins each month. Of course, it all made sense now. The widow's prying questions, her constant watchfulness. She wasn't just a gossip, she was a spy. Ellie was surrounded by enemies she had never even seen. What do we do? She asked, her voice trembling, but her resolve hardening. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with a cold, clear anger. They had taken her father. They would not take her son. I will take him to the jail, Tyan said, nodding toward Caleb. Sheriff Klein will have no choice but to lock him up, at least for the night. The threat of exposure will be enough to force his hand. That will give you a head start. Pack only what you can carry. Food, water, warm blankets for the boy. Meet me at the old oak tree by the creek, 2 miles east of town. Do you know it? She nodded. They used to play there as children. Go now, he commanded, his eyes boring into hers. Do not look back. Do not speak to anyone. Ride as if the devil himself is chasing you. Because tonight, he is. He was gone, melting into the darkness with her husband slung over his shoulder. For a moment, Ellie stood frozen. Then the dam of her grief and terror broke. A single sob escaped her lips. She looked down at Micah, sleeping peacefully in her arms, completely unaware that their world had just been turned upside down. His innocent face gave her strength. She would not fall apart, not now. She moved with a frantic, focused energy, stuffing a saddlebag with dried meat, a small loaf of bread, 2 canteens of water, and every warm blanket she owned. She grabbed the 2 tiny deerskin moccasins Tyan had made and tucked them safely inside. Then she paused, her eyes falling on the family Bible on the mantelpiece. Inside, tucked between the pages, was a faded photograph of her parents on their wedding day. Her father, strong and smiling. Her mother, beautiful and radiant. She took the photo and left the Bible behind. She scribbled a hasty note and left it on the table. A final, desperate gamble. It said, he knows everything. She didn't sign it. She didn't need to. If Caleb or his father found it, they would understand. And maybe, just maybe, it would make them hesitate. With Micah strapped securely to her chest, she slipped out the back door and ran to the shed where Caleb kept his second horse, a sturdy mare. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the saddle, her ears straining for any sound of pursuit. The world was quiet. Too quiet. She mounted the horse and urged it into a gallop, not toward the road, but through the dark woods, the branches whipping at her face. She didn't look back at the small house with the peeling paint. It wasn't her home anymore. It was a cage she had just escaped. The ride was a nightmare. Every rustle of leaves was Caleb. Every shadow was his father. But she pushed on, guided by the sliver of moon in the sky and a desperate burning hope. She found the old oak tree, its massive branches like skeletal arms reaching for the sky. Tian was there, waiting, a second horse held ready. He had her mare's reins in his hand before she had even fully stopped. The sheriff locked him up, Tian said, his voice grim. But he sent a telegraph to Silas Hartman in the next county. His father will be here by morning with hired guns. So much for buying time. We must ride north through the Badlands, Tian said, pointing toward a dark, jagged line of hills on the horizon. It is hard country, but they will not expect us to go that way. They will think we will follow the river west. He helped her transfer Micah, still sleeping, into a more secure sling on her chest. His hands were gentle, careful. For a second his fingers brushed hers, and a jolt of warmth shot through her, a strange and comforting feeling in the cold, terrifying night. Are you ready, Eleanor? He asked, using her full name. She looked at him, this avenging angel sent by her father's memory. She looked at the sleeping child nestled against her heart. She was leaving behind everything she had ever known, riding into a dangerous, unknown future. She should have been terrified, but she wasn't. For the first time in a very long time, she felt free. I'm ready, she said, and together they spurred their horses and rode into the dark, unforgiving wilderness. A storm of vengeance thundering at their heels. They rode through the night, the horses' hooves a relentless drumbeat against the hard, rocky ground. The Badlands were a maze of canyons and cliffs, a landscape designed to break a man's spirit. But Tyan moved through it with an unnerving confidence, as if the jagged rocks and twisted trees were old friends, whispering secrets to him. Ellie followed, her body aching, her mind a whirlwind of fear and exhaustion. Every time Micah whimpered in his sleep, her heart seized with terror. They were so exposed, so vulnerable. But one look at Tyan's calm, determined profile was enough to keep her going. He was her compass, her shield. At dawn, they stopped in a hidden alcove, a small pocket of green hidden behind a waterfall. The place was invisible from the main canyon. "We will rest here until dusk," Tyan said, helping her dismount. "Their riders will be sweeping the plains by now. They will not think to look so deep into the Badlands." He gathered firewood with a silent efficiency and soon had a small, smokeless fire going. He shared his rations with her, dried venison and hardtack bread. It was the most delicious meal she had ever eaten. As Micah nursed, safe and warm in her arms, she finally found the courage to ask the questions that had been haunting her. "Tell me about my father," she said, her voice soft. Tyan stared into the fire, his face a mask of old sorrows. "John was a brother to me," he began. "My tribe was trading with the town. John was the only one who treated us like men, not like animals. He learned our language. We learned his. We hunted together. We swore an oath. No wike. It means one blood." He paused, his throat working. "Silas Hartman wanted the land your father's farm was on. It has a spring, the only year-round water source for miles. He tried to buy it. John refused. He said the land was his family's future. A week later, he was found at the bottom of a ravine. His horse had apparently stumbled. But John was the best rider I ever knew. His horse would never have stumbled." "You knew it was murder," Ellie whispered. "I knew," Tyan confirmed, his voice hard as flint. "But I had no proof that the white man's law would accept. The sheriff declared it an accident. The case was closed. Silas Hartman bought your family's land from your grieving mother for pennies on the dollar. She moved you to that little house in town, and a part of her died with your father." The story settled in Ellie's heart like a stone. The pieces of her life, the sadness that had always clung to her mother, the constant feeling of being less than, it all snapped into a grim, terrible focus. "Why now?" she asked. "Why wait all these years?" "Vengeance is a dish best served cold," he said, quoting a phrase he must have learned from her father. "But that is not the only reason. I watched you grow up from a distance. I saw you marry Caleb. I hoped he would be a different man than his father. I was wrong. When I saw him raise that whip to you, to the daughter of my brother, the time for waiting was over." He looked at her, his dark eyes burning with an intensity that made her breath catch. "This is not just about revenge, Eleanor. This is about justice, for John, and for you." They rested through the day, taking turns keeping watch. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in fiery colors, Tyan suddenly stiffened. He put a finger to his lips, his head cocked, listening. Ellie heard it a moment later, the faint sound of horses and men's voices echoing from the canyon below. "They found our tracks," Tyan whispered, his face grim. He quickly smothered the fire. "They are moving faster than I expected." Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at Ellie's throat. "They have us trapped." "Not yet," he said, his voice calm and steady, a rock in her sea of fear. He pointed up toward a narrow, almost invisible crack in the canyon wall above them. "There is a path there. The horses cannot make it, but we can. It leads to the high plateau. We will have the advantage of high ground." "The horses," she began, her heart sinking at the thought of leaving them behind. "They are a liability now," Tyan said, already checking the sling that held Micah. "We move on foot, quickly." The climb was treacherous, a brutal scramble up a steep, crumbling rock face. Ellie's muscles screamed in protest. Her lungs burned. But every time she faltered, Tyan was there, a strong hand on her back, guiding her, supporting her. Micah, sensing the danger, was blessedly silent, his small body pressed tight against her. They reached the top just as the first of Silas Hartman's men, rode into the alcove below. There were 5 of them, hard-faced men with rifles slung across their saddles. They saw the abandoned horses, the still warm ashes of the fire, and let out a triumphant yell. One of them looked up and saw them silhouetted against the twilight sky. "There they are!" he shouted, raising his rifle. A shot rang out, the bullet whining past Ellie's ear, so close she felt its heat. "Get down!" Tyan yelled, pulling her behind a cluster of boulders. They were pinned down, trapped on a barren plateau with nowhere to run, and a group of armed, angry men climbing up to get them. Tyan pulled a long knife from his belt. He also had a bow and a quiver of arrows. It was no match for 5 rifles. "They will wait for full darkness to make their move," he said, his eyes scanning the terrain. "It gives us a little time." "Time for what?" Ellie cried, her voice cracking. "To be slaughtered?" Tyan looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than certainty in his eyes. He reached into a small leather pouch at his belt and pulled out a single, beautifully crafted arrow. The arrowhead was not made of flint or iron, but of a strange, dark, glassy rock. "My grandfather gave me this," he said, his voice low and reverent. "He said it was a gift from the Star People. He told me to use it only when all other hope was lost." He knocked the strange arrow to his bowstring. "Stay here," he said. "Keep the boy safe." Before she could protest, he slipped away, disappearing into the deepening shadows like a ghost. Ellie huddled behind the rocks, clutching Micah, her body trembling uncontrollably. She could hear the men below, scrambling up the rock face, their curses echoing in the night. It was only a matter of time. She closed her eyes and prayed. She prayed to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. She prayed to her father's spirit. She prayed for a miracle. And then she heard a sound that was not of this earth. It was a high, piercing whistle, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very rock beneath her. It grew louder, more intense, until it felt like it was inside her own skull. The men who were climbing stopped, their voices silenced by the eerie noise. A brilliant, blinding light erupted from the far side of the plateau. It was not the light of a fire or a lantern. It was a cold, blue-white light that pulsed with an unnatural energy, casting long, dancing shadows across the rocks. Then came the screams. Terrified, animalistic screams of pure agony. One by one, they were cut short. Then silence. A deep, profound silence that was more terrifying than the screams had been. The light vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, plunging the world back into darkness. Ellie stayed frozen for what felt like an eternity, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would burst. The only sound was Micah's soft breathing and the lonely cry of the wind. A figure emerged from the darkness. It was Tyan. He was alone. He walked toward her, his face pale in the moonlight. He no longer had the strange arrow. "What was that?" Ellie whispered, her voice trembling. "What did you do?" Tyan looked at the sky, at the millions of cold, distant stars. "I called for help," he said. He offered her his hand. "It is over. They will not trouble us again." They walked to the edge of the plateau. Down below there was no sign of Silas Hartman's men. No bodies, no weapons, nothing. It was as if they had simply vanished from the face of the earth. Ellie looked at Tyan, at this man who was so much more than he seemed. He was a warrior, a protector, a man who held the secrets of the earth and the sky. He had not just saved her life, he had rewritten the laws of her world. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time she wasn't just running from something, she was running to something. A new life, a future she would build herself, under the watchful eyes of the stars. The journey to Tyan's village took 2 more days on foot. It was a grueling trek, but a strange sense of peace had settled over Ellie. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, steely resolve. She had walked through the fire and emerged reborn. The Apache camp was nestled in a hidden valley, a place of impossible beauty, with a clear, sparkling river and lush green grass. It was a sanctuary, a world away from the dust and violence of the town she had left behind. They were welcomed not as strangers, but as family. An old woman with a face like a beautiful, wrinkled map took Micah from Ellie's arms, clucking over him and wrapping him in a soft fur blanket. Others brought them food, a warm, savory stew, and led them to a lodge that had been prepared for them. For the first time in his short life, Micah was surrounded by a loving, gentle community. He thrived, his cries turning to happy gurgles, his eyes bright with curiosity. And Ellie began to heal. The bruises on her soul started to fade. She learned to grind corn with the women, her laughter mixing with theirs. She learned a few words of their language. She learned to listen to the rhythm of the earth, the whisper of the wind in the pines. She learned to be still. Tyan was always there, a quiet, reassuring presence. He taught her how to track, how to read the signs of the wilderness. He told her more stories of her father, painting a picture of a man she had only vaguely remembered. He was giving her back her past. One evening, as they sat by the communal fire, watching the stars appear one by one in the velvet sky, he turned to her. "Silas Hartman will not rest," he said, his voice low. "He is a man who cannot stand to lose. He will find out where we have gone. This place, it will not be safe forever." The cold knot of fear, which had almost disappeared, tightened in Ellie's stomach. "What will we do?" "His power is in the town," Tyan said, "in the lies he has built. We cannot run forever. To be truly free, we must go back. We must tear down his house of lies, stone by stone." Go back? The thought was terrifying. Back to the town of whispers. Back to the world of men like Caleb and Silas. "How?" she asked. "It's your word against his. They will never believe an Apache and a runaway wife over the richest man in the county." "Sorry. We will not need them to believe us," Tyan said, a glint in his eye. "We will give them proof they cannot deny." He then told her his plan. It was audacious, dangerous, and bordered on insane. It involved a secret ledger, a disgruntled sheriff, and a final public confrontation that would either set them free or get them all killed. Ellie listened, her heart pounding. The old Ellie would have run from such a risk. She would have chosen the illusion of safety, but she was not the old Ellie anymore. She was John's daughter. She was Micah's mother. She was a survivor. "When do we leave?" she asked. A slow smile spread across Tyan's face. "At dawn." They rode back not as victims, but as warriors. Tyan had procured fresh horses from a neighboring tribe. He had also procured something else, 2 sticks of dynamite from a prospector who owed him a favor. Their first stop was on the outskirts of the county at a small, rundown ranch. The ranch belonged to Sheriff Klein. They arrived in the dead of night, moving like shadows. Tyan left Ellie with the horses and crept toward the house. A few minutes later, he returned with the sheriff, who was in his nightshirt, his face pale with terror. Tyan had his knife pressed to the man's throat. "You have 2 choices, Sheriff," Tyan said, his voice cold. "You can help us, and you might just live to see another sunrise. Or you can refuse, and your wife will be a widow come morning." "What? What do you want?" Klein stammered, his eyes wide with fear. "Silas Hartman keeps a ledger," Tyan said. "A record of all his business dealings. The bribes, the land grabs, the murder of John Hartman. I know he keeps it in a safe in his office in town. You are going to get it for us." "I can't. He'll kill me." "We will kill you faster," Tyan said simply. The sheriff, trapped between 2 deadly forces, made his choice. The next day, as the townspeople were going about their business, Sheriff Klein walked into Silas Hartman's office. He came out 10 minutes later, carrying a heavy leather-bound book. He delivered it to Tyan, who was waiting in a nearby alley. "Now for the final piece," Tyan said to Ellie, handing her one of the sticks of dynamite. "The telegraph office. If Silas calls for help, we want to make sure no one answers." Ellie's hands trembled as she took the dynamite. But as she rode toward the telegraph office, her resolve hardened. This was for her father. She slipped into the empty office, lit the fuse, and placed the charge under the desk. She was out the door and on her horse before the explosion ripped through the building, shattering windows and sending a plume of smoke into the air. It was a declaration of war. The blast drew everyone into the main street, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. They were all there: Widow Mayfield, the store owner, the men from the saloon. And then Silas Hartman himself stormed out of his office, his face purple with rage. Caleb was beside him, looking gaunt and furious. He had obviously been released. "What is the meaning of this?" Silas bellowed. That's when Tyan and Ellie rode into the center of the square. A collective gasp went through the crowd. "This is a reckoning, Silas," Tyan called out. his voice echoing through the stunned silence. He held up the ledger. I have here a book of your sins, a record of every man you've cheated, every life you've destroyed. He opened the book and began to read, his voice clear and strong. He read about the bribes to the sheriff. He read about the stolen lands. And then he read the final damning entry. John Hartman, final payment made to buyers for a permanent solution to the land dispute. Declared an accident. Land acquired. The crowd murmured, their eyes shifting from the ledger to Silas Hartman's pale, sweating face. Lies! Silas screamed, his voice cracking. It's all lies concocted by this savage and my son's treacherous wife. He pulled a pistol from his coat. I'll see you both in hell. He aimed the gun at Tyan, but before he could fire, another shot rang out. Not from Silas. It was from Caleb. He stood there, a smoking pistol in his hand, his eyes wide with a strange mix of horror and relief. Silas Hartman crumpled to the ground, a look of shocked betrayal on his face, a dark stain spreading across his chest. The crowd stared, speechless. Caleb had just shot his own father. He was a monster, Caleb stammered, looking at Ellie, his eyes pleading for a forgiveness he didn't deserve. He turned me into him. I never wanted. I'm sorry, Ellie. I'm so sorry. In that moment, Ellie didn't see the cruel man who had terrorized her. She saw a broken boy, a victim of his father's evil, just as she had been. There was no victory in his demise, only a profound, heartbreaking sadness. Tyan took the second stick of dynamite and lit the fuse. He walked over to Silas Hartman's office, the symbol of his corrupt power, and tossed it inside. He and Ellie backed their horses away as the crowd scattered. The explosion was immense, a cleansing fire that consumed the office and the ledger and all the secrets within it, sending a shower of burning paper into the sky like dark, vengeful birds. When the dust settled, the reign of the Hartmans was over. Ellie didn't stay. There was nothing left for her in that town but ghosts. She and Tyan rode back to the hidden valley, back to Micah, back to their new life. The path forward was unwritten, but it was hers to write. She would raise her son in a place of peace, surrounded by a community that valued honor and kindness above all else. She would tell him stories of his grandfather, John, a good and honest man, and she would tell him about Tyan, the warrior who had come from the wilderness to deliver a justice that was older and truer than any law written in a book. She had stood in the street, a victim. She had ridden into the Badlands, a survivor. And now she was home, a free woman, ready to begin again. If you believe that justice, no matter how long it takes, will always find its way, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where the truth refuses to be buried. And let me know in the comments, do you think Caleb deserved a second chance? We'll see you next time.